Welcome, Mr. Wall. I guess this is your debut at a budget hearing. We are delighted you're here. If you will introduce those with you, please.
We have Chairman Buchanan to my right. To my immediate left is Deputy AOE Joan Nixon, and to her left is our Finance Manager, Mr. Bill Hayden.
The threshold question, as you have been hearing, and we appreciate your patience as we are running a little bit behind schedule, the threshold question is, can you operate within the mayor's proposed budget?
Mr. Chairman, if we must, we will. However, there will be a corresponding reduction in services that we can provide.
And I suspect you have the explanation for all that, and the floor is yours for presentation.
Thank you, sir. There's an envelope that Ms. Waller distributed. I'd like to just briefly tell you what the contents are. First of all, there's a document called the Davidson County Election Commission. It's about today's meeting. It's a talking point document that I will use in just a minute. There's also a copy of a letter from State Coordinator Mark Goins talking about the importance of the early voting sites. I'll get to that as well. And then there's some budget information, and I think the most telling one is the graph that shows what has happened to the Election Commission budget over the years, and the downward track is very obvious. If I might now go to this document, the talking point document I call it. I tried to do this in a very simplistic way. Page number 2 is just a budget overview that compares what we requested in our budget and what the mayor's recommendation is and what the difference is, and takes the important categories such as the elections, core staff, and so on. The total of our request was just under $3.3 million. The mayor's proposal is just over $2 million, and so we have a reduction of almost 40% in our request. So the following pages will detail the impact in each of those core areas. And the first area, which is page 3, is the elections themselves by election. First of all, there's the August election, which is the next one coming up. We had actually requested $775,000, which includes early voting and all the activities that are associated with it, including Election Day. The mayor's proposal is a reduction of just over $200,000, which is about 26%. We had originally requested for early voting 1 site for 14 days, 11 sites for 6 days, and of course on Election Day there'd be 161 sites for Election Day itself. Now, the impact of the reduction will mean we'll have fewer early voting sites for sure. We will have fewer poll workers on Election Day, and we will have longer lines on Election Day, which is going to produce, we think, some very unhappy voters. Mr. Goins' letter goes into detail about the need for early voting sites. The amount of money that I'm told will be spent across the state on some of the issues that will be involved in that election is quite considerable. The state coordinator is anticipating quite a significant turnout for that election, and therefore the number of people or voters that we can move to early voting benefits us all on Election Day. Therefore, the need for early voting sites. So the funding that we would need to get us back to where we should be, in my judgment. I've been discussing this just yesterday morning with Mr. Riebling. We have in process perhaps a formula that will allow us to get to something that is closer to what we ask for. But this is an explanation of what the impact will be on August. But with the way the funding is proposed by the Finance Department, this is quite a significant reduction. I should also point out that we used a zero-base approach on all these elections, and we also looked at history, but we also looked at what the current need is or going to be. And the need for the funding is to get us to the state-mandated manning level for each precinct on Election Day. we don't have a lot of flexibility in what we can do. There are certain required positions that are absolutely mandatory, or we can't open that site. We also have to be aware of certain ratios between the political parties so that representation is as equitable as we can make it. So there are a lot of boundaries, let's call them, that dictate how we go about this process. The next election that's of significance next fall is going to be the November state general election. I used the same approach in the document I presented. We requested almost $1.3 million for that election. It was reduced by $338,000 by the mayor's proposal. We had originally suggested early voting sites would be 12 for 14 days because, again, the ballot is going to be quite lengthy. We've also, of course, requested 161 sites for Election Day itself. The same impact will occur in November without additional funding that we're looking at in August, which is fewer sites, fewer poll workers on Election Day, and longer lines. The funding formula that I've been discussing with Mr. Riebling would be somewhere in the order of one site for 14 days and perhaps as many as 9 sites for 7 days, and that's the same general formula that we've spoken about but not necessarily confirmed as of yesterday morning. So there is a way, I think, to bridge back to what is equitable, but please keep in mind that if without that, we'll have some unhappy voters most likely. We're also planning in our budget for a September runoff election. It's Council District number 11. We requested $134,000, which I know sounds like a lot of money compared to what you might assume would be a need on 4 sites for a council district. However, there are certain requirements for that election. There are in all the elections, but it will occur specifically on this one. Regardless of what we do. We don't have any way to cut those corners, and frankly, at this point, in order to get to what we originally requested, the mayor's recommended amount of $50,000 doesn't allow us to even put on the election. So we would be hard-pressed to even carry out that event. We really need the funding increase on this event, and I've shown on the right-hand column that the expenses that go beyond just election day and the early voting sites also involve election costs of some $68,000. That involves advertising, it includes staff, it includes a lot of other things that would be required for that election. So if we were to live with the mayor's $50,000, we would need about $70,000 more just to be able to put this on. Then in preparation for calendar year 15 elections, which is on page 6, the metro election expenses will start to occur in this coming fiscal year. We had proposed $53,000. The mayor's recommendation is $50,000. We can certainly live with that, no problem. Then we have the city of Oak Hill, which will be in June. It's a small amount of money. The mayor's recommendation essentially meets our need, and that's not an issue. So the election picture is, I hope, fairly straightforward. I used a format here that Mr. Stein suggested, which is to hit the bullet points and to zero in on the key points of what that involves by election. Page 7 involves our core staff. This is the permanent staff, let's call it. We have 2 poll recruiters currently existing on the staff. In order to carry those forward into the new fiscal year, we need $193,000. That's salary and benefits. The mayor has proposed $100,000, which basically is 1 person. So we would be down 1 recruiter right away. Our satellite office staff is funded in the mayor's proposal at what our request was $175,000. And by the way, the satellite office is the one we refer to as 2nd Avenue at the Howard Office Building. Now, if we can commingle these funds, and Mr. Riebling and I have talked about doing that in terms of looking at trying to take care of a lot of needs beyond just those specifics, we can make it work. We can make the formula work to not blunt the momentum that we've established this year. We also are really in need of some more help in information systems technician there. We have 2 billets or slots right now. We need a third one. We need to be moving into more of the 21st century in the way that we communicate with our poll workers and the way we do recruiting. We've made some strides this year with the help of Metro IT. For the first time at the Election Commission, we can actually, a poll worker or a candidate can actually apply online, and we didn't have that capability. The capability that existed prior to this turn of events was you either had to download the documents or come out to our place and pick up a set and fill it out. We've now gone to where they can apply online. That's going to be a big help, but that's just the first step. We really have got needs beyond that will help us do a better job. This is an unfunded position by the mayor's proposal. We've also had requested 2 slots in what we refer to as absentee or early voting. It's a accumulation of a lot of disciplines. I call it special voting. We had requested 2 slots at $133,000. The mayor had recommended 0. By the way, these 2 slots were originally requested in the current year's budget and also were not approved. So we're coming back with that request again. What we've had to do in the meantime, since those positions were unfunded, is we use part-time workers, which means it's minimum pay. We have high turnover when people find something better and they move on. So then we've got to retrain the next people. So it's a constant turnover that we'd like to avoid. The same situation actually on page 8 as it goes into the voter registration area. We'd requested 2 slots, which would amount to $113,000. These were originally requested for this current fiscal year. They were not approved. We're asking for the same reasons to prevent the turnover, that these be looked at seriously for some kind of funding to enable us to get away from this part-time approach. We'd also proposed an increase for our poll officials, the amount of money that they're paid. Now, this is in the hands of the council. This is not anything that the Election Commission can control. All we can do is request. But I can tell you that without this, it makes our recruiting a whole lot more difficult. I've had it pointed out to me, and I have had several conversations that people, poll workers, are not doing it for the money. Well, let me tell you, it enters into the equation. When they are told what's expected of them to work a 14-hour day on election day, at least 14 hours, for what they get paid now, it's $8.57 an hour for that kind of a day, and no transportation expense. So it's asking a lot. The other thing that to me is a real need here is to increase the amount of money that we pay to a poll worker for training. It's currently at $15. Now, if you live in Bellevue and you have to drive to Metro Southeast for training, which a lot of people do, or from Joelton to Metro Southeast, that's a long way. $15 is almost nothing when you really calculate what the impact would be. So the proposal that we had put forth would amount to $82,000 in this upcoming year. It would take the officers up in terms of what their daily rate is from $220 to $250. We've also identified a new position there. It's an enhanced workload position in the precinct. We're calling it the deputy, which currently is at $120. We're proposing to take that to $180. And then a regular poll official, the one that gets $8.57 an hour, we're proposing to take that to $150 a day, to at least try to balance what we're asking people to do on election day with what they get paid for. Now, I'm told by several of the council members that I've spoken with that this probably could be handled as a council resolution. Maybe that's the approach, but the need is still there regardless. On page 9, we had requested $95,000 for year-round training so that we don't have a crunch right before an election cycle begins, which we've had this year and will have going forward without this, because the laws keep changing, the election law. And the more that we can bring our people throughout the year up to a better understanding throughout the year so that it all doesn't hit right in the election cycle, the run-up to the election, it would be a big help. We requested $95,000. The mayor's proposal was $0, but the need is still there. We had requested $98,000 for software and licensing agreements. These are obligations that we have, expenses that we are contractually obligated to pay. The mayor's recommended budget was to meet our request, and we're fully funded. In the voter registration area, the voter registration requirements, it's $47,000, but in order for us to carry this off to the state and federal standards, which is what we have to go by, we need the $47,000. Without that, we've got to take it out of operations. It's got to come from some other place. We don't have a kitty sitting someplace that we can go and rob. Lastly, we had a line item in there for temporary clerical services. This is something we found a need for this election cycle. This is the run-up where we have a heavy workload and the staff is pretty well taxed. That if we can use some temporary services, typing services, clerical services, it'll take some of the burden off the staff. So, Mr. Chairman, that's our response to the mayor's proposal.
Mr. Well, let me ask you a clarifying question out of my own ignorance. Under state law, the local government sets the rate of compensation for poll workers?
That's my understanding, yes, sir. Each county.
I've learned something new. Mr. Cooper, somewhere between you and the legal department, you need to that, because I don't ever recall us having legislation that specifically said poll worker things, but I could be wrong. I've only been around 20 years or so, but that you could be absolutely right, but that's a new learning. One other question for me before we open it up to council members. If indeed, obviously we're making an assumption, obviously, because we have to prepare for it, of course, the runoff, a September runoff for the open council seat. If indeed that election does not take place, then indeed you will not need those funds, correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
yes, sir.
Thank you. Councilwoman Weiner.
Thank you, Chair. I have several questions, so I'll get right to it. How long does it take to train by day or number of hours a poll worker?
The state statute says they have one training session, but we found in the critique of the 2012 elections in Davidson County by the state coordinator that poll workers were not adequately trained. So for this cycle, we adopted a different approach. We wanted smaller classes. We wanted all hands-on to the degree that we could do it. We were operating with new equipment, the electronic poll book, and we felt the need for hands-on. Simply a PowerPoint presentation wasn't going to get it. I can tell you that a class for a precinct registrar, which is one of the positions that operates the electronic poll book, is about 3.5 hours long. I had thought originally, based on some input from some other folks, that it could possibly be done in 2 hours. It cannot. We took a much more deliberate approach, much more step-by-step. We also took another precaution here, and that is we said to the workers, you can come back, attend more classes. We also provided laboratories for these workers to attend these sessions on their own, at their own schedule. These were generally on the weekends, and every one that I went to, which was all of them, they're all full. In fact, we had people standing in line waiting to get the next open seat. So the interest in learning about the new technology and how to be competent with it and feel comfortable with it was clearly there. So it's taking a lot longer, but I think it's paying off. We had far fewer worker-related issues on election day than I think perhaps has occurred in the past, and we actually had more people working the election at the precinct. We had 1,205 positions, and the presidential in 12, it was just over 1,100. So we had a big increase in the number, which was great, but we also had more people to train, which we're happy to do. But the training burden is pretty heavy on us. We do not have a trainer, by the way.
So if you train throughout the year your existing poll workers that you know are going to be recurrent, Could you potentially facilitate that through an online webinar, if you will, and then bring them in for laboratory?
Yes, we could. We could certainly look at that. Now, one thing that we do have is we have a video that Metro IT produced for us, and the poll workers could actually access that prior to the election. Let's say, for example, if a poll worker went to class on April 3rd, election is more than a month away, the week before they could go on that website. It would take them through the fundamentals. It does not spend any time talking about their specific duties, but it does talk about how to operate the electronic poll book. Now, there's another position in the precinct, which is the change of address clerk, the one we want to redesignate the deputy. They use the electronic poll book as well, but it's a different purpose. They do not print any ballot applications as the precinct registrar does. So the duties are sufficiently different that the training is lengthy for all of them. Now, the shortest amount of time for any of the positions in training is the machine operator. And that takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours per session. And I should point out, if I might, that all that training burden fell on us. We had staff that had to do these classes, and we had almost 40 classes of poll officers and change of address clerks, all taught by Ms. Nixon and one of our other associates. We were fortunate to find 4 other poll workers, there's not employees, who volunteered their time to also be instructors. And without that, we would have been really hard pressed.
So it might make sense to take a look at some ongoing webinars in all these various areas that would free up their time, Joan's time especially, so that she could devote that to other things and potentially save you some money.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that was question number 1. Question number 2 refers to your clerical services workers that you're looking at. Are they actually keying in data?
No, these are not. These were just typists that were doing PowerPoint presentations or something like that. They are not involved in data on that specific issue on temporary services. No, that is actually done by part-time employees of the Election Commission.
And they're actually keying in registration cards?
Voter registration information. What else, John?
Data entry, any data entry or any updates to a voter's information, new voters, current voters who are making changes. So they're doing that.
So I have a very simplistic question. I don't know if you're familiar, I'm going to sound like a commercial here. Are you familiar with Neat Receipts? The little machine that you can scan a receipt or a document or a business card, and it will actually parse out individual information much faster than keying it in?
Well, we had looked, in fact, Memphis, Shelby County Election Commission does that very thing. Their system scans and it actually populates the fields
Right.
in their voter registration system. And we just have not relooked at that for further information on wanting to get that.
I would like to request that you do that. I think that it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run, and it'll also alleviate some of the error issues that you might have from manual input. And I think that just from a budgetary standpoint, that might be something you want to consider. Let's see, my next question. Relative to those poll books and the mistakes that were made, you knew I was going to bring it up, or somebody was going to bring it up. My question is, how have you managed in the future to alleviate that potential problem recurring?
Well, the error that occurred, I should describe. The process that was to have been followed was that early voting data, voter records, were downloaded from our office to the software supplier, which is electronic systems and software and systems. That went complete. All of our records that were complete. That information then is converted, sent back to us so that we can then go through the process called burning the flash card, which is the card that actually goes into the electronic poll book that has all the records for that precinct and all the voter records for the entire county, which is a feature that's with the poll book. There was a mistake made on the side of the supplier, the software supplier. They did not send us back all the records that we downloaded to them. Our mistake on our side was we didn't check what they sent back. So there were two human errors here. If the procedures had been followed as they were outlined, that would not have occurred. I've talked with one of the senior executives with that company. They have made a lot of changes, they've told me. I'm waiting for the confirmation and the specifics to prevent that from happening on their side. They're putting other checks in place. Ours was simply an oversight by one of the employees. However, on election day, when this first surfaced, which was about late morning, I'd say 10:30, 11 o'clock on election day, began to get some indication of this, the record not being right as regard early voting. We were able to identify what the problem was within 30 minutes. We knew what that was. And we also looked at how to deal with it. How could we handle it? Should we make a change in the process of voting, or should we wait until the end of the day? And we elected to proceed as we had planned, wait till we got to the end of the day, because we would be able to immediately check against our voter registration database, our voter record database, in terms of who voted twice, let's say. And when that was in place. And so the procedures to check that on the back end were there. It should have never have occurred on the front end. And it's human error. I do think that certainly we will be definitely on the lookout for going forward.
Thank you. I believe that those are all my questions.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Councilman Tiger.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, is it appropriate to ask the finance director the wide discrepancy between the needed budget as proposed by the commission and the administration budget? Or are there any comments?
Oh.
You asked me if he get a microphone?
Yeah.
He had answered yet.
If he would like to answer, he's here.
Okay. Obviously, there's a $1.3 million difference. You all had a reason to propose the budget as you proposed. They had an explanation here. You've seen the data as I have. Wide discrepancy.
Well, I would, remind you that if we funded the request of every department, we'd have about a tax rate probably twice what it currently is. So you have to remember that there's a lot of requests that aren't funded in this government.
Okay.
And a lot of good requests. Not saying they're not needed, not saying they wouldn't serve a good purpose, but there's a lot of requests that aren't funded in this government. I think it's fair to say that I have sat down with Mr. Wall and spent some time with him, and I do believe that I concur that they do need some additional funds for early voting sites.
Okay.
And he and I are working on that. I'm working through the process, and I'll have more to say on that in the next few days in terms of how much and all that. But I think they are correct that they do not have, I mean, they're not, in my mind, I don't know anything about running elections. I have to rely on what they think they need for early voting sites. I don't know what the right answer is, but to get anywhere close to what Mr. Wall asked for in terms of sort of a reduced request from what they had originally requested, they're going to need some additional funding,
Okay.
one way or the other. I concur in that, and I clearly will support that because I think obviously elections are pretty fundamental. I mean, I do believe that, and I want to make sure that, and based on the letter that he shared with me from the commissioner of the head of elections, whatever his title is, in terms of the size of the ballot, both in August and November, and the complexity of the ballot in both August and November. I think it is going to take voters longer to vote, and I think that early voting sites are going to be important, and they seem to be increasingly important as we go through elections. So I think as it relates to early voting sites, there is a need for some additional funding in some form or fashion.
Okay, that's great to hear.
And then I think as it relates to the other stuff, I think then I think you fall into a category of wants and needs versus what we can fund.
Reality and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So, Mr. Chair, would whatever adjustments the Finance Department makes, would this be incorporated in your revised budget wish lists and whatnot?
Yeah, we'll wait to get that information, and
Okay.
then obviously share that with the committee. We obviously have a couple of weeks, and in that period of time.
Will we
yes.
have it in enough time that if there are enhancements that this body feels is important, that the administration?
I think there will be some commitment will need to be made before the end of the budget process so they can make a decision on early voting sites for August. I think that's right. Am I right, Mr. Wall, based on what you're talking about? I think you need to know in early June at the latest. Sooner the better, but
Yeah.
no later than early June. Is that right?
June 13th.
June 30th, yeah. So, which is a little before the budget process. So in terms of August, we need to make an agreement on that, and then the rest could follow the budget
Well,
process.
let me just use an example. For increase in poll worker per diems or salaries, whatever you want to call it. If you don't consider that a necessity, and this body does, we need to know what kind of difference it is, maybe not the full 120 to 150, but split the difference this year and look for the rest next year or whatever, but we need to know what that formula might be. So that's why I don't want to come to the chair and say, hey, I think the poll workers need an increase, and we're too far in the process to get that done.
The chair will hold Mr. Riebling's feet to the fire to get that information in a timely fashion for us to act.
So just the fundamental question as it relates to early voting, I contend that part of the problem with low voter turnout is lack of consistency with early voting locations and times and this type of thing. Is that a realistic statement or not based on your limited experience? And maybe the chair wants to comment on that. And would we see a more energized voters if there was consistent that we knew these X number of places were always going to be early votings? I know places close down and demographics change, but realistically consistent places that are open for X number of days, including people like to vote on Saturdays for whatever reason, I guess the free time, those type of things. So I'm just curious.
Since I have an experience of only one election, I'm going to ask Ms. Nixon to address that.
Okay. Great choice.
The consistency is important. I mean, we believe, the commission historically has believed the consistent, same voting locations, the same hours. Our last commission kind of set the pace of getting the hours more uniformed. But of course, with some elections, you do have to stay open later. For example, in August, and for the July early voting period, we will have to, because it's a federal election, so we will have to stay open. But we use the same locations consistently, and that's what's good. Whatever the budget that we're given and we work within that determines if we're going to open MOB first 14 days and then the rest of the satellite. So we work with what we're given, but the locations and the hours are consistent as possibly can be.
Well, that's my point, that, if we settle on 9 is the correct number of early voting sites to get people through on a timely basis, then is it going to be X number of days or a higher number or a lesser number? And I know presidential elections and all these other things create that, but some type of consistency on it would seem to...
It just goes back to funding. I mean, that's...
Well, and that's the responsibility of the administration and this body to make sure that we allow you to create that consistency so voters know what to expect at each time.
And once we began to use the libraries, which have been just superb in their relationship with us, that created that consistency a lot. And of course, with determining the type of election we're going to have, then we would use the Bellevue Community Center or the Friendship Baptist Church when the election would call for that need. So we do have consistency as far as with the libraries, and The other locations are very minimal when we need them.
Right.
So they're there.
Well, my final comment, I know this was a tough election. Everybody regrets the problems. I just appreciate the honesty that you didn't try to hide and say it was somebody else's fault or it was a software company, that you admit that there were things that we could have done better here, and obviously our vendor should have done better on their end, and not point the finger. Just stand up and take it, and let's make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Councilman Moore.
Thank you, Chair, and thank everyone for being here. Mr. Wall, on page 5 of your presentation, now this, I wanted to understand that when you do have these elections in the satellite cities, do they help contribute to help fund? They don't? Councilman Stein shaking his head already.
I don't think they do they?
Do they, I mean, to help offset any cost?
I believe they do.
Do they?
City of Oak Hill will reimburse it. That shows up.
Oak Hill will? I'm sorry.
They do, I'm sorry. That will show up as a revenue also, so the City of Oak Hill would reimburse the city, goes to the general fund because we fund the thing, but yes, they do pay for that.
So what about Berry Hill?
I think they're all true. I think, I'll double check, but I believe they all pay their cost of their elections for their city elections.
Now, of
Okay.
course, it is more, it's better for them when they attach it to a current election.
Okay.
For example, Belmead, Forest Hills, and the city of Goodlettsville held their elections in November, so their costs are pretty minimal. But for Berry Hill, if they have a standalone, which in an off-presidential election year they do, we had one in March, so they reimbursed the city, the government, as Mr. Riebling stated.
Okay. And my second question is on page 7. The 3 satellite office staff that you have, do they spend time at the main office, or they just strictly stay at the satellite office?
Currently, and since I've been there, they've been the same staff there. They're not switched back and forth. Now, depending upon the workload at Southeast, they may pitch in, but they're always at that location.
Okay.
We have to have a minimum of 2, so that if somebody takes a break or has a day off, we're not closed down.
Okay. And on the last page, you had said clerical support during peak periods. How many positions are you referring to?
I think this time in May, we actually had 1 outside help, and that was really to prepare PowerPoint presentations for the classes. And so we had a crunch. We brought someone in. I'm not sure of the name of the service, but it's a Metro contract service.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilman Claiborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Wall and group for being here. Appreciate your presentation to us. Before I ask a couple of questions, I just wanted to compliment you on what I think is some improvements that you've made. I know there was great gnashing of teeth over moving the Election Commission to its current location, but I think in hindsight, there may have been great benefit that's been accomplished through that. And I wanted to compliment you on the establishment of what you called the War Room. When I visited with you, I remarked to you that reminded me of an S3 operations center in a military operation. And so I think that's bringing that kind of visibility to what's going on out in all the precinct areas is a means of helping to eliminate a lot of problems that we've experienced in the past. And so I compliment you on those improvements. I have questions. You talked about the meeting the state mandated staffing level. And are you saying that we are not currently meeting what the state mandates in terms of staffing elections, or?
We did in this election, but in 12 that was not the case. I read the state coordinator's report on the 12 election, and it was not pretty.
Okay, so if your budget, if you had to live with the budget as it's being proposed, would you be able to meet those mandated levels in the elections that are coming up in this year?
Probably not.
Probably not.
However, I remain hopeful that we'll find the bridge to be able to do that. What we've been trying to do is, when I arrived in December, I discovered through a telephone outreach to our poll worker staff that we had less than 1,000 poll workers that we could count on for this election year. That was way short of anything that would allow us to get up to the state level. Our recruiting has been remarkably successful because we had these 2 recruiters that were brought in, and they were terrific at what they did. We had 475 poll worker applications that were received from January 1st. We were able to deploy on election day 325 of those. That got us over from somewhere around 900 to 1,000 up to the number that we actually had. Now that's not the end of it. We need to pad that number so we've got a bench, so to speak, that we can draw on. One of the things we wanted to do this time around for May is to have what I used to refer to as the flying squad. These were trained poll workers who were at our office that could be dispatched at a moment's notice to go wherever there was a need. If a poll worker had a flat tire, couldn't get there, if somebody got sick or just didn't show up, we had a way to do it. So we will be needing more poll workers, and that's the reason for our request, so that it doesn't all come to a halt when this fiscal year ends. And when Mr. Riebling and I talked about that, a way to get across that bridge. And I think it's going to allow us to continue and keep the momentum that we have, but I don't want to even jeopardize our ability to achieve what the state requires.
And the second question has to do with the voter registration requirements that you say that you can't meet because what you've requested in your budget, there was nothing funded there. And so what are those requirements that are there that we can't meet? What is the impact of that if we don't do that?
We'll use part-time people, which mean they're trained until they find something better to do and they move on to a higher paying job, because our pay rate is $10 an hour. And we've been lucky to be able to get those people, and they have filled the gap for us. But it's putting a extra workload on the permanent staff that oversees voter registration or absentee. And we'd like to lessen that somewhat, and we've not been able to do it except through part-time workers.
Okay. Can you tell me what the rationale was, or do you have any idea for overfunding the Oak Hill budget election?
No, sir, I cannot.
I mean, Mr. Riebling, do you have any idea what the rationale was for overfunding the request for the Oak Hill election?
I'm not sure I follow what you're saying, so I'm sorry. I don't know.
On the sheet presented to us from the election commission, it shows that it's .310.
They asked for 11.8 and we gave them 11.5. Or the other way around?
It's the other way around.
The other way around. They asked for, the request was for 11.5 and they were given 11.8.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer.
I mean, that doesn't make sense to me when we're cutting essential areas and we overfund a small election. I mean, it's minimal dollars, but it still doesn't make sense to me. I think that's probably that .3 we could take and use in some of these areas here that are deficit.
The request was 11.8.
Use your microphone, Mr. Riebling.
I'm sorry. I'm just looking at my original. According to my records, the request was for 11.8, but maybe it was. I'll double check that for you, Mr. Cleveland. But according to my budget documents that I have that are separate, different, is that the original request was for 11.8, and that's what we funded.
Okay. Well, somewhere there's a discrepancy in there. The other question, final question I have. In 2000 or in the current year, the Election Commission budget was 2.3 million, and we had to provide a supplement there. So they're asking for 4.8 this year, which is a $2.5 million increase. And so they're getting $497,000 increase, giving them 2.8 million. In the budget preview document that we had after the State of Metro address, on page 14 says major departmental budget improvements. Public Works was getting additional money, police getting additional money, parks getting additional money, library getting additional money, Election Commission getting an additional $2 million, $3. So if that were true, then that would bring the current budget up to 4.3 million, which is about $500,000 less than they're asking for. So what happened to that
I will answer that for you, Councilman.
Okay, thank you.
When you do an election is a non-recurring event because every year they're different. Some years there's 2 or 3 elections, and some years there's 1 election, some years there's no elections. Very rare, but some years there are no elections. So for years, this budget office has always treated elections as non-recurring because they change from year to year. And so you take out the non-recurring money every year, and you add new non-recurring money in for what's needed for the elections for that year. So there's about $1.5 million of new non-recurring money for the 2 elections for 2015, and then there's about $500,000 of other improvements to get to the $2 million. It's the way, to my knowledge, this budget's always been shown.
Okay, so their budget this year, if as it stands, is what? What is it? That's
It's $3,165,000, Councilman,
$3,165,000
That's with the supplemental.
with the supplemental.
with a supplemental, right? And is being proposed is, I lost my note here.
Councilman, remember, again, it's complicated to look at the budget because you have to back out the elections to compare apples to apples and then go forward. The net increase to the department, taking out elections, to try to simplify it, because it does, I can't understand it, I'm supposed to understand it, is that the net increase, forget elections for a second, so we took those out, is they have about $500,000 of additional money in their budget, a little under $500,000 of new money in their budget for this year.
That's without the elections.
Right, and there's also, obviously, there's changes in the internal service fees, which also affect the budget.
But so about $500,000 increase over what they had last year. That's what's being proposed. Is that correct? Without elections.
Without elections, yes. And, I can go through the numbers for you if you want me to, more detail.
Well, I'm just saying, you just said that
Yes.
they're getting about $500,000 more than they've got this year without elections.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so a lot of the deficits that have been identified here have to do with the elections. So are we saying that this $2 million figure that was presented as being improvements to the Election Commission, that we're looking to fund the elections that are coming up that are considered non-reoccurring?
What I said is that I do believe they need additional money to adequately run early voting for both the August and November election, above what is in the recommended budget.
Right.
And we've been working with Mr. Wall to try to identify that number, and I think we're close to coming up with a recommendation, which I obviously need to talk to the budget chair and others in the administration to make sure everybody's comfortable with those numbers.
Okay. So and I'm not trying to batter you here, but why, when you gave us this document here, when you gave us the preview, why was it stated there that the Election Commission was going to get a $2 million improvement? Why was that stated that way? If they're not getting that kind of
It's
improvement?
$2 million in new money, because the non-recurring each year is treated as new money. The non-recurring election money is treated as new money each year. We would do that every year that way. Because you take it away,
Right.
and you put back in whatever is needed for the elections. You could argue with the way it was presented, but that's the way I think we've presented it in the past.
Okay. I mean, I'm just trying to keep up with that. So I guess I'm interpreting what you're saying, that with these non-reoccurring costs that are coming, that theoretically, we could put in $2 million to fund all of those needs. Is that right? Or $1.5 million?
The council can do whatever, I mean, you can do whatever you want to do.
I'm just looking at this number here is all. I'm just confused by that, and if I were in Mr. Wall's position there and saw this number on the day after it was presented, I think I'd probably jumped over my desk and say, hey, I'm going to get a $2 million bump here, because I just think that was misleading.
I apologize for your misunderstanding of what I presented, Mr.
Okay.
Councilman.
Just,
Discuss a little more, or I can't say any more than that.
like you said earlier, you don't always agree with me. But I just think that's a point that needs to be made. And I don't know if it was created consternation for the Election Commission and staff, but if it did, then I'm sorry. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilwoman Allen.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm looking at the right numbers here. In the handout that was given, are these numbers just the increases that were asked for, and how do they relate to the numbers that are in the big book, which I'm seeing is a total of $3.662 million for 2000? Oh, I'm sorry. If you look on page D051.
Page 2, the summary sheet,
Right.
shows what our request was that we submitted to finance for the new fiscal year
Okay.
by these categories.
Gotcha.
What we got back from finance was what is titled here, the mayor's recommendation.
Right. So in this book, which I assume is what the budget is, I'm seeing a number of 3.6 million. How does that relate to this study?
I think this just deals with the improvement request.
Right.
On page 2. It's
Right.
not all, it's not the base of the budget, it's just the improvement. They requested
Okay.
3.2 million in improvements. More,
Okay.
and we funded 2 million of that.
So what we're discussing here is the difference between what they requested of the mayor.
Above what they were getting anyway?
Above what they were, right.
Okay.
And so we're not, it's not an actual cut, it is a lack of funding of the proposed increase.
Increase. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Chair Stein. I have 4 questions. The first is, how old do you have to be a poll worker?
You can be 17, but you have to be 18 by the election.
Okay, and do you do outreach? This is kind of like the A part of the question 1. Do you do outreach to those
Yes, we
people
do.
that would be 17, 18? Okay, and then also, why didn't we receive sample ballots for the primary election this year?
The May election is usually historically low voter turnout election, and historically, we have not mailed out a sample ballot for the May election. We send sample ballots based on what type of election it is. For example, for August and November, there will be sample ballots mailed, but for a May election, we do not mail out a sample ballot.
Okay, I think a lot of people were confused and needed some help on that, especially with it being so many candidates. But I think you explained it by being historically something you don't do.
Right,
But there were
that
just
is
so many candidates. I think a lot of the people were overwhelmed.
Well, this same ballot was in '06, and we did not do the same exact ballot in May of '06, and we did not mail sample ballots for the county primary back then.
Right, I understand what you're saying. Historically, you don't. But I'm just saying, so many candidates as you move forward, that might be something you want to think about doing. And also, I wanted to know, what does the registration position do, the person that registers the voters? I wanted more details about what specifically they do.
That individual, inputs the data, where we have one full-time person that's over that department, where it used to be we had 3 full-time. And so that one full-time person is the supervisor of the temporaries that we use to input our data.
Okay, and how many registered voters would you say that y'all have had within the last year?
Within the last year. I don't have that figure in my head, but we have a total of active and inactive voters around 373,000.
Yeah, I saw that part, but
Yes.
on the website, but I would like to know how many new registered voters you have each. I mean, you can send it in.
Yes, we could. Yes, we could.
Right, because it deals with this question, right? Because this is the person that will be putting in the information whenever somebody registers.
Right, that is correct. And a lot of our data entry is through the motor voter agencies, such as your Department of Safety. So we get hundreds every week. And that is never going to end. That is always going to be a constant volume of new registrations. So when you just have that one full-time person, because after an election, as an example, for 2013, it was a non-election year. So that one person had to oversee that, to devil out to everybody else, as for myself and other staff, to handle that load. So the motor voter agencies' information will never decrease. So it's always going to be a volume of people. And we have just had to use temporaries to do that work for us.
And it's not a way that you can upload it or merge the systems where the person doesn't have to do it. It seems like it's a duplication if they go to the motor voter registration. As a way that you could just...
We are not set up to do that, and previously there had been some conversations with the State Coordinator of Elections Office to discuss how the Department of Safety could maybe give us that information in a file, but it has not been pursued, to my knowledge, anymore about that. And also to Council Ladies Weiner asking about the scanning the document and then populating the voter registration information. That is something that needs to be looked in, investigated more to see if that's a possibility.
Yeah, it seems like that would help tremendously with the operations of it. And also, a lot of the people in my particular district this go-around were unclear about where they were voting. And so they were turned back, and I just wanted to see how often do you send out information when there's new precincts, or just to remind people where their precincts are?
Well, and we also have to remember that it's been a year since an election has occurred in Davidson County. So people get very familiar with where they went to, say, August of 12 or November of 12, and they may have had a change of their own. They may have initiated the change, but our voting locations, especially in your district, have not changed since the 12 election. We do have the ability to go online to look their information up. Call our office, we'll look that information up. Even if they go to the State Election Commission website, they can put their information in and it will populate their voting location.
Okay, but I guess my question is, I'm trying to see how often it's sent out.
We don't initiate a mail out to say that here's your voting location, because you have the card. You have a voter registration card, and it has that information on it. We don't do periodically mail outs to alert voters that that 19-1 is the main library. That is why we put the information in the paper. We put the voting location ad in the paper for that purpose. But we don't periodically send out a notice to notify a voter that this is election day and this is where your voting location is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so what about the people that don't read the paper or don't have access to it?
They can call our office. That's what we do on a daily basis, and that's what we do on Election Day. That's what when they come into the office, if they're lost, we tell them where they're supposed to go. If they go into a precinct that they used to vote in, we give them what we call a redirect. The electronic poll book allows us to print the location out for that voter, and they can go on and find their voting location. So there are several things in place to assist the voter in getting that.
I know the question sounds elementary, but it's obviously a problem, and I think that more outreach could be done. We always assume that people use paper, read the newspapers, or have email, but there are some people that absolutely have no clue. So I think we have to do more in outreach.
Well, and we do a lot of outreach. I do a lot of outreach outside of business hours in the communities, and to let them know where they can find this information and any questions that the community has. So we're there in the community addressing some of your concerns.
Okay, and then I guess the final piece is, will we get a report or some type of kind of follow-up? You explained it. I think the director explained it a little bit, but just kind of what happened with the duplications and the voters. Will we get some type of report or something like that?
All right. Understood.
Councilman Bedney.
I can't believe it's my time. So a question for, I think it's Mr. Rivlin, and forgive my ignorance, but do we get any money from the federal government or the state to help pay for these elections?
Yeah, there's some state grant for equipment the council just approved.
We just approved
Lease some equipment, but in terms of the operation of the day-to-day operation, it's just like any other metro department. It's funded out of the general fund.
The only election that the state reimburses metro government is the presidential preference primary.
Okay, so if you could update this file to indicate any additional grants that the city gets, just so I can have a better feeling for the type of grants that we get to help offset this cost.
There's nothing to offset the operational cost. It's just the leasing of, the state gave them money to help lease some additional equipment for the August election, is that right?
Yes.
For August and November election.
Machines, was it not?
For 100 additional machines for that vote, but that's the only, but all the other costs of the operation are borne by the city.
Councilman, that's a 3-year rental agreement for 100 voting machines.
Did the fact that we got to deal with that voter ID issue, did that create some of the additional costs during the election?
You mean in this past election?
Yeah, this new law that they passed in the state.
Well, the update from the law from 12 is that now you can no longer use out-of-state government-issued photo IDs, but that was not an issue in May.
Okay, so there was no addition, none of these costs here is reflective of any state law or anything?
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilman Claiborne.
There's one more quick question. What were the areas of the city that had the highest percentages of voter turnout this past election?
That would be the northwest, the area, the Bordeaux area, Clarksville Pike, Whites Creek Pike area over that way. Cathedral of Praise was a high voter turnout, very high, but in that corridor of the county.
North side of the city. Thank you very much.
When were the current numbers, the current amounts for compensation for poll workers most recently set? Did we not increase them in the last few years, Ms. Nixon?
They were set in 2011.
Okay. I just want to point out that our very crack staff director has looked at the statute, and you are indeed correct, not that we doubted you, but the last time this council, proving I have a faulty memory, the last time this council approved poll worker compensation was 1999. So at the very least, there probably needs to be legislation introduced that would ratify what the Election Commission did some years ago, which they probably, obviously under the statute.
That's relying on the Metro
Right.
ITS search
Right.
system.
But we certainly know that in 2011, we didn't have legislation that we can find.
I'm gonna go to the clerk's office.
So we need to certainly ratify that action very soon. Councilman Clement, do you have another question, or you're still on? Thank you all very much. We will be back in touch with you soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.